Again, welcome to today's Transcend Professional Development Core Didactic Training titled Fostering Ethical Integrity, Collaborating with the IRB and C&T Research. We are fortunate to have Kristy Shirley and Andrea Ludwig leading today's presentation. Kristy Shirley is the Research Integrity, Security, and Compliance Manager at North Dakota State University. She has worked in research compliance for nearly 20 years, most of that time working in the protection of human subjects. In 2018, she led NDSU's transition to the revised Common Rule, updating the IRB's policies, procedures, and forms to comply. And in 2020, served as the project lead for the development of NDSU's electronic IRB management system. Prior to NDSU, Kristy served as an IRB member, reviewing research conducted at a local behavioral health facility. Andrea Ludwig serves as the Institutional Review Board Administrator at North Dakota State University. She oversees IRB protocol and processing and oversight of human subjects protections training. Andrea has worked at NDSU for two years and previously served in the medical administration field for a decade. Please welcome Kristy Shirley and Andrea Ludwig.
Great, thanks everybody for being here and for sharing this time with us on a Monday before a holiday. So we really appreciate your time. I'm going to start us off. Some of this may be a review for those of you who do a lot of human subjects research and have had to, at times through your past, done the city training. But I think it's important to think back about the history and how IRBs came into being, and think about the structure of our regulatory environment when we're talking about fostering that research ethics. So we're going to start out way back in World War II with the Nazi medical experiments. And so on your screen, you can see here we have a victim of one of the Nazi medical experiments where they're being immersed in icy water at the Dachau concentration camp. This, among other human experimentation, went on in concentration camps during World War II. Another picture here of a Jewish child being forced to show the scar left after one of the SS physicians removed his lymph nodes. Child was one of 20 Jewish children injected with tuberculosis germs as part of a medical experiment. There were countless research experiments that were conducted at this time in the concentration camps in Germany. And after World War II, the Nuremberg trials tried 22 Nazi doctors for the murder of concentration camp prisoners during the course of these experiments. And so you'll see here 4 Polish women who arrived in Nuremberg to participate as prosecutorial witnesses in what was called the doctor's trial. And this is really important because it was this that then led to the development of the first professional code of conduct for conducting ethical human subjects research. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was written, and you'll see a couple of bullet points on the screen outlining some of the basic tenets of the Nuremberg Code. That informed consent was an essential part of conducting ethical human subjects research, that studies should be informed by prior experiments on animals and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or problem, that scientific justification that we have for our research that we conduct today, that societal benefits of the study should outweigh the risks to the individual participants, that even with informed consent, that subjects should be able to terminate their involvement in the study, and that research in which serious injury, disability, or death was expected should not be conducted. In the US, we also had things like the Public Health Service funded Tuskegee syphilis study that ran from 1932 to about 1972. This study started out as a replication of a study conducted in Oslo, Norway in the 1800s, looking at the natural progression of syphilis. In Norway in the 1800s, they studied white men. In Macon, Georgia, in 1932, they decided to replicate the study with African-American men to see if there was a difference in the natural progression of the disease between the races. In 1932, when this study first started, there was no known treatment for syphilis, but men who were both healthy and some who had already been infected were recruited for this study. Fast forward several years until about 1945, they discovered that penicillin was safe and effective treatment for syphilis, but that was withheld from the men in the study, and the study progressed for nearly 30 years after that treatment was discovered. In the 1960s is when we start to see some further regulation of human subjects research. In 1962, the Food and Drug Administration first imposed the requirements on the testing of investigational medications, where thalidomide was being used in Canada, in Europe, to treat morning sickness in pregnant women. Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey in the US decided that after her research on how drugs penetrated the placental barrier, she withheld that approval in the US. And then we later found out that thalidomide caused birth defects. In 1964, the World Medical Association published the Declaration of Helsinki, a statement of principles considered to be the standard for clinical research. And this has been updated and revised throughout the years. In 1966, the Public Health Service, the same funding agency that funded the Tuskegee syphilis study, began requiring awardees who of their awardees conducting public health service research to establish human subjects review committees. After the Tuskegee syphilis study finally broke, in response to the public outcry, we had the National Research Act in 1974. And this is when things really started to change in the US. The Public Health Service policy that all research had to be reviewed by a human subjects review committee finally became regulation. And the National Commission was established. The National Commission for the Protection of Biomedical and Behavioral Research Subjects was formed, who wrote the Belmont Report in 1979, which became the foundation of today's regulations. Advance to today, and this is my compliance attempt at humor. Do you ever feel like we're being watched? Now we have the Food and Drug Administration, we have the Office of Human Research Protection, which is the agency that oversees what we now call the common rule research. We have accrediting bodies like AHRP, the IRB, study monitors, all overseeing the fishbowl. Because we're talking about clinical and translational research today, I thought it was important to look at how the different funding agencies or the regulatory agencies overlap. The Food and Drug Administration oversees clinical investigations of drugs, biologics, and medical devices, regardless of the funding source. So even drug company funded and industry funded research is subject to the FDA rule. The common rule, which was formed out of that Public Health Service policy, governs federally funded human subjects research. Now, most institutions apply the rule more broadly, including institutions like UND and NDSU. There's also sometimes overlap, where if we are receiving federal funding for research that is FDA regulated, both the common rule and the FDA regulations would apply. And the most stringent would be what we needed to meet. Because we have two different regulatory agencies, we have a couple of differences in what is considered research. The common rule defines research as a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge, where the FDA defines a clinical investigation as any experiment in which a drug is administered or dispensed to or used involving one or more human subjects. For the purposes of this part, an experiment is any use of a drug except for the use of a marketed drug in the course of medical practice. This also applies to devices and food additives. Under the common rule, A human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student conducting research, obtains information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual and uses, studies, or analyzes the information or biospecimens. So this is your primary data collection. You've proposed a research study. You are directly interacting with human subjects to collect information about them for research purposes. But there are times where we have a secondary purpose to our data collection where we might use data or specimens without direct interaction, that is obtaining, using, studying, analyzing, or generating identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens for research purposes. With the FDA, our human subject can be either a healthy human or a patient that is the recipient of a test article or the recipient of the control. So I'm going to hand things off to Andrea. She's going to talk about the levels of review and ways that IRBs can collaborate in research.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So the Institutional Review Board uses 3 main levels of review to evaluate research involving human participants. It's exempt, expedited, and full board. The level of review depends on the level of risk to participants and the type of data or intervention involved. Next, please. The first one is exempt. Exempt does not mean that the project is exempt from ethical oversight. It just means that it is exempt from ongoing IRB review once it's approved. However, your institution may have different requirements for that. UND may have different requirements than NDSU and so on. These studies do present very minimal risk to participants. Examples for this may be anonymous surveys or interviews that do not collect identifiable data or sensitive information, educational research in normal classroom settings, secondary data analysis of de-identified data. The IRB staff or designated reviewer, not the investigator, decides if the project qualifies for exemption. Researchers must still follow ethical principles, however, and most of NDSU's protocols are exempt or expedited, and we'll get there in a second. Key points for this: no risk to privacy or well-being, and must not involve vulnerable populations such as children or prisoners. Next, please. Expedited review applies to research involving no more than minimal risk. However, that does not fit into exempt categories. Review is conducted by 1 or more experienced IRB members rather than the full board. So at NDSU, we typically have 2 IRB board members along with the IRB administrator, which is myself, who review the protocol. So I will send it to the IRB board members. We give them about a week to do their initial review, and then we will send it back to the researchers and the PI to make their comments and updates. And then we will send it back to myself and the reviewers to review it and see if they are okay with the updates. And then we will either approve or send it back. So these protocols do take time. So planning accordingly for these is essential because, again, they just are more time consuming. Examples of these types of protocols are collection of small amounts of blood from healthy volunteers, non-invasive data collection methods like surveys or voice recordings, or use of existing identifiable data where the risk of harm is minimal. However, expedited refers to the review process. It's not the speed. It's faster because it does not require a full board meeting. Next, please. Full board. This is where it requires when researchers involve more than minimal risks, such as vulnerable populations or sensitive topics, like clinical trials involving new drugs or devices, studies with deception that might cause emotional distress, research involving minors, prisoners, or individuals with cognitive impairments. The study must be reviewed during an IRB meeting with quorum present. The board will discuss risk-benefit balance, informed consent, confidentiality, and participant safeguards. Approval can come with conditions or request modifications to reduce risk. NDSU's board meets monthly, and we ask our researchers to have their protocols and materials submitted 1 month prior to that meeting. It gives our board members a chance to review the PI, a chance to update it, and then a chance for our reviewers to review it again. We do also invite our PI and their team to come to the meeting and answer any questions that our board may have, clarify any questions, and it just helps clarify the whole process for their study. The goal for this is to always protect human subjects and ensure that ethical research is being conducted regardless of the review level. And properly identifying the level of review helps streamline the process and maintain compliance per the regulations. Next, please. So criteria for review. As you see, there's some bullets on the screen, but when reviewing research, whether it's exempt, expedited, or full board, the IRB ensures that risks to participants are minimized and reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits. The selection of subjects must be equitable, ensuring fairness and appropriate inclusion. Informed consent is sought from all participants, no matter what, and it's properly documented to ensure understanding and voluntariness. The safety of participants is closely monitored throughout the study, and measures are in place to protect privacy and maintain confidentiality. Additional safeguards are implemented for vulnerable populations, again, such as prisoners or individuals with limited decision-making capacity, to ensure their rights and welfare are protected at every stage of the research process. Next. Strategies for effective collaboration with IRB. So early IRB engagement. Connect with the IRB as early as possible to identify concerns, clarify review pathways, and discuss reliance arrangements. Early communication does help prevent delays. It can help the IRB understand things that you may not. You're the expert in your area, we are not. How you write it is how we read it, so it can help clarify those things early on. So early communication is good. Understanding IRB requirements, be familiar with each institution's regulations and tailor your documents accordingly. This does ensure compliance and it does help speed up review. Utilizing reliance agreements. For multi-site or collaborative studies, reliance agreements streamline review by allowing one IRB to take the lead, reducing duplication while maintaining compliance. And as always, clear communication. Respond quickly to IRB's questions, keep documentation organized, and maintain consistent communication throughout the study. The holdup can either be the IRB or the researcher. So, keeping communication open and clear is a must for both sides. Next, please. IRB as a collaborative partner. So traditionally, many researchers have viewed the IRB as an obstacle, a hurdle to clear before starting their study. So it would be fair to say, let's reframe the relationship from the old to new, that the IRB is an ethical consultant and a collaborator. Let's shift this and make it a relationship and a partnership, and focus on protecting the participants, enhancing research quality. Collaboration with us strengthens research by helping improve the design, ensuring standards are met, and increase the credibility of the study, and it can help support smoother publication success. Next, please. So reliance agreements. This is something that a lot of you have probably heard about, or a lot of you have dealt with, but maybe don't know what it all takes to go into, or what it takes to get done. And you don't need to necessarily, but reliance agreements are a formal written agreement between two or more institutions that allow one IRB to rely on the review and approval of another IRB. The use of reliance agreements have become the standard after the 2018 revisions of the Common Rule, which encouraged the use of a single IRB. It does help ensure consistency across all sites, and it does help avoid redundant reviews. Next, please. So let's say you're doing a study with 2 or more universities and like we work with UND and Stanford quite often. So if NDSU is the IRB of record, I am going to initially look at the protocol. And if I see that they are also engaged in the research, I reach out to them right away just to give them a heads up because they are busy and they have a ton of protocols to review. And so I give them a heads up that they are potentially engaged in this research based on if the protocol is expedited or exempt. You know, they may need a reliance agreement, they may not. But each university has their own policies and their own process that they want to follow. So point being is that it may take a lot of time. So giving them the heads up will ensure that it's on their radar and that it can, it's not going to be on the back burner at the very end of the protocol process. It's now at the beginning. And so if it's exempt, I will say, are you okay ceding to NDSU? Because most institutions do not rely and need an actual reliance agreement for exempt protocols. For exempt, we do, or excuse me, expedited, we do. So then that requires a DocuSign official document, excuse me, that require the VP and the VPR to sign back and forth. So that also takes extra time. So it just depends on what type your protocol is, where it's going, and what their processes are. So point being is that it takes time and plan accordingly. And as soon as you can, let your IRB know, so then we can get that moving as well. Next, please. So collaborative research. This slide highlights key steps to ensure effective collaboration across multiple institutions. It is crucial to clarify the roles and responsibilities of each team member, especially around data collection, obtaining consent and reporting. Clear communication and defined tasks help prevent confusion and ensure accountability throughout the study. Second, it identify all the institutions involved in the research that engage with human subjects. That's super important. Again, it's required federally, but also for reliance agreements as well, because if you're at the end of your study and then you come back right before it's about to be approved and say, oh yeah, X university is also engaged, then we have to start that reliance agreement process all over again, and it slows you down, right? And then you can't start your study until that reliance agreement, and then that person from X university can't participate in the research. And so it just slows it all down. So identifying all institutions involved in the research is super important. Each institution does have its own IRB requirements, so knowing who's involved is essential. Engage with the relevant IRB office to determine if collaborative review or reliance agreements are possible. Next, please. Common challenges and possible solutions. When everyone has the same goal, misunderstandings and roadblocks can happen. These challenges often come down to communication gaps, unclear expectations, or complex study designs. We're human. Again, you guys are the experts in your fields and we are not. We just know the rules and regulations. And so you have a job to do, we have a job to do, and we're both just trying to get that done. And so communication gaps and unclear expectations tend to get in the way. So keeping communication open will help a lot of these come through. So one of the top issues that IRB encounter is unclear or incomplete protocols. And in regards to incomplete consent processes as well, or excuse me, consent process as well, we recommend using our templates that are embedded in our protocols. We have put them there, but they are editable, but we know that they are what we need and what we want from our researchers, and that they follow the regulations. You don't have to use them, but we recommend using them, and things like that. Researchers can also request peer review feedback from the IRB or research ethics office before submission. It saves time later and ensures that consent language aligns with federal and institutional standards. Multi-site studies can involve multiple IRBs, each with its own rules and interpretations. That can lead to, stress and frustration. You can use platforms like Smart IRB, which allow institutions to rely on one another instead of several. Delayed approvals. So this is a big one that I have encountered not very often. The frustration of people, wanting their protocols done soon. But delays can happen, but it's not always because the IRB is slow, but it's because submissions are missing crucial information. And so it comes down to either IRBs are small. IRB offices are typically small in these areas. And so you only have one or two people that are doing all the protocols and the phones and the emails. And so we just ask, be patient with us. We're doing the best that we can. So the more information and the more defined information you have in your protocol, the better chance it has of coming through the first time without needing updates. Or the less likely it is to need second updates. Be proactive, ask your IRB questions beforehand before you send it through. If you're an advisor in a class, help your students out, stuff like that. But delayed protocols can be a frustrating thing for everybody. So the more we can try to stop that, the better. And then evolving study scope, file amendments early, and then explain as needed. Next, please. Building culture. So at the institutional level, fostering ethic integrity means creating systems that make ethical behavior the default choice, not an afterthought. Institutions can offer ongoing training in research ethics, not just the one-time city course. Primer and the 3 I's are a great conference to attend, either in person or virtually. At NDSU, me and my iCook IBC co-partner have decided last year we started going to the union. It's a centralized location, but that way faculty, staff, and students can come to us and no appointment needed. They can just walk by and ask a compliance question and we're there for them. Making it easier for them. We want to just make it, like I said, make it easier for them. Make it comfortable for them to ask questions. Transparency is key. At the individual researcher level, culture begins every day with everyday habits. Build ethics into discussions at meetings or project check-ins. Lead by example. This is big if you're faculty or you teach a class. Demonstrate respect for the IRB. We really appreciate when you guys loop us in and want us to come talk to your classrooms and your students. I get a lot of positive feedback that they enjoyed it and it helped them understand what's needed as a student or a grad student. So we appreciate that as well. At the community level, clinical and translational research often involves partnership with patients, clinics, and community groups. Ethical integrity extends beyond. It's about trust with the community. And always be sure to share study outcomes transparently, including both successes and limitations. But remember that translational research, the goal is to translate findings into real world benefits, and that requires public trust. This feels short, but this is the end of our, oh, sorry, I have a takeaway slide. Ethical integrity is a continuous process. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. Collaboration with the IRB strengthens science. It safeguards participants and accelerates discovery. And it is respect, communication, and shared purpose are keys to a successful partnership. And I believe that is the last slide.
So we do have some resources here. The Office for Human Research Protection has resources on what constitutes engagement. So if you're wondering if your partner at another institution, if what they're doing constitutes them being engaged in human subjects research, so you know whether or not they need IRB or review, this is a helpful document for that. But like Andrea said, all of your IRB offices at your institution are here to answer questions as they come up. We have links to the HHS or the Common Rule regulations, the Food and Drug Administration regulations, and then the Belmont report that we talked about in that historical document section. It's only about 4 to 5 pages long, but it really outlines a foundation for ethical human subjects research of respect for persons, beneficence, which is that risk-benefit ratio, and justice, and ensuring that the participants who are bearing the risk of the research are also reaping the benefits. And with that, we will open it up to your questions. If you have questions about your specific research projects, how to collaborate with your IRBs, anything, we would be happy to answer them.
Kristy and Andrea, this is Steve Wunderlich. And I worked at UND for many years and had affiliations at NDSU as well, and have used both of the IRBs at those two institutions. I'm now at Sanford, and I have a question that I think fits under the culture slide that you had a minute ago, and it's actually something that I'm having to get my head around, and it is the notion of human research protection programs. And when I was at UND, it's like I don't remember hearing much about that. I dealt with the IRB a ton, and we got along fine. And now we are talking about a bigger, broader program about human research protection, and it's gonna, from what I can tell, at major universities where there's a academic medical center, they have robust HRPPs, and we're talking about establishing a more well-defined protection program that would include our IRB scientists, potentially research participants with lived experience, our compliance office, regulatory and compliance office, our legal office, and basically what it does, it brings people to the table, sets agendas, sets up metrics and markers for progress in terms of this. And so my question is, I don't know, like with UND and NDSU, do you know if there are, beyond the IRB, are there broader programs in the university that deal with this issue?
So the movement towards human research protection programs has been around for probably 10, 15 years. The IRB is one component of that human research protection program. I think at the university level, we have a less maybe mature version of a human subject human research protection program, but we have the IRB, we have the compliance office, we have student and faculty involvement. It can include post-approval monitoring. It's the educational component. So it is there, but maybe not as clearly defined as in some places. But accrediting agencies like AHRP really are focusing on all of the different aspects of that human research protection program, but having a strong IRB is definitely a big part of that.
Yeah. No, that sounds consistent with actually kind of where Sanford is at right now. And the one thing I have learned trying to get my head around this is there's tremendous variability in how big and how formal these programs are. Some it's more informal, the elements are all there. Some it's a committee that meets routinely. So no, I appreciate that, and good to know. Very nice talk.
Dr. Paul Carson has a question.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Nice job, both of you. I'm sorry I joined a couple minutes late, so I missed Kristy's portion. I'm going to look forward to looking at the recording, but I just wanted to make a comment and then one question on something Andrea said and how I think a lot of researchers had viewed, and maybe still many have the view, that the IRB is an obstacle. And I appreciated Andrea's comment that really we should be evolving to look at them as very helpful collaborators. And just over the span of my own career doing research, screwing up with ethical issues very early on in my career, I could have really benefited and avoided some big risk laps by having talked to my IRB colleagues earlier in the process. And then I would also say, having worked with Kristy over a number of years at NDSU, we just found her enormously helpful in helping us view the nature of several of our studies, and in things that I anticipated being major obstacles. Asking her, she was able to help us see, no, this isn't a particular obstacle. You can approach it this way, and really helping us to make things go much smoother and easier, rather than the anticipated barriers you often think you might find with the IRB. So I've just found when I have approached them as colleagues that has been enormously helpful. My question is, can you, Andrea, the word you used wasn't reciprocal, but can you guys tell us what are the existing reciprocal relationships between IRBs and kind of the Red River Valley corridor here, the major institutions in the area? Which ones do we have existing reciprocity with?
So we don't have overarching agreements with any of the institutions or organizations in the Red River Valley per se. I mean, we work closely with UND, we work closely with Sanford, with Essentia. There are times where we have established relationships with research groups that we know that we're always recruiting Sanford patients. So we might do a small, an umbrella reliance agreement for that research group's protocols. But most of the time we address things on kind of a per protocol basis. Because what we're going to look at is who all is engaged, who's got kind of the most interaction with the participants, who's kind of bearing that responsibility and determining who makes sense to be the IRB of record and who makes sense to be the relying IRB. I will say that we all know each other well. Andrea, I know Deb is retiring, but the folks at the Sanford IRB office, we've interacted with them regularly. Michelle from UND, we're all very comfortable with each other. We respect each other, and we know each other's policies and procedures fairly well. So we work fairly closely with those institutions. Does that answer your question, Dr. Carson?
Yes, thank you.
Kristy and Andrea, hey, it's Gary Schwartz. I'm the PI of Transcend at UND, and I much enjoyed your talk and found it a refreshing update compared to some of the resources that have been online up to now. I have a question that I'm curious about. I think that I've run into a lot of confusion with early stage faculty and graduate students about the idea of exempt review. You made it clear that there are 3 levels of review. Their review, though, the exempt, the expedited, and the full. The problem comes in with the word exempt, which generally means free from obligation or liability. So many people think that exempt review means exempt from review, when it's not. And I asked them, I said, well, have you got, and the IRB said, oh, well, this is exempt. Well, no, let's talk about that. So I'm wondering whether it might make sense to avoid some of that confusion going forward if the exempt review were relabeled as, say, basic review or something. But there is there's a misperception that exempt review means exemption from review.
You're right. There has been a long standing confusion with the term exempt. Unfortunately, it is what federal regulations give us. They give us exemption categories. They give us expedited categories. In 2018, when they revised the common rule, that was one of the things they talked about changing, and they toyed with calling it excused research versus expedited. They didn't make that change. I'm not sure that excused would have necessarily been much better, although it might have, because people might have thought, well, I have to ask for an excuse. Ultimately, the federal regulations kept the term exempt. And so to be consistent from institution to institution, we stick with the federal term so that there's not confusion.
I have one other question about what actually classifies as research. Your presentation and also the city course talks about the research being sort of goal directed in the sense that it's a study whose goal is to produce generalizable knowledge. And there's some kind of ambiguity there because many individuals or groups perform the same sorts of studies and claim that it's merely process improvement. That is, what their goal is to make something work better. And here's a very sort of concrete example, so it isn't so abstract. Let's say I'm teaching medical students a course in clinical neuroscience. They perform badly on some diagnostic part of it. Say they can't recognize Parkinson's disease very well. So I decide, you know what, I'm going to do a study. Let's determine what the study is. And half of them will get the standard curriculum, usual care, as it were, and the other them will learn a mnemonic. That is, everyone has to recite TRAP, which is tremor, rigidity, akinesia, and postural instability. And I want to compare whether or not individuals who learn a mnemonic do better on an exam versus individuals who get usual care. Now, at one level, I'm tempted to say, well, that's process improvement. I want to make sure that I want to improve the scores on the clinical exam. However, one could argue, no, you're actually testing an educational intervention, and if it were true, it would be generalizable knowledge. What's the difference?
It's so in your example, you have both you have an experimental group and you have a control group. And I think in that case, you have a fairly good argument that that is research because you have both. You are comparing. You aren't just saying, you know, my control didn't work. So I'm going to try a new method going forward and see if it gets better. So anytime you have that comparison of an experimental group to a control, that leads you to a systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. I always tell people I came from a quality management background. There was a lot of data that we collected to look at baselines. There were quality improvement initiatives that we pushed forward to try to get better results, but our goal was better results for our facility, not better results for generalizable knowledge. So in those instances, we did not seek IRB approval because it was not research. When we looked at when we wanted to demonstrate to people, hey, this new treatment method is better, then we would compare it to a control, and that was generalizable. That had a goal of generalizable knowledge. Does that answer your question?
Oh, it does. It does. It's just that it's a blurry line sometimes.
It is. Which again is another reason, as Andrea said, to engage the IRB early, because that's one of the questions that we answer sometimes, not just in a clinical realm, also in an academic realm, when people are adjusting things in their classrooms to look at better outcomes, is this research or is it quality improvement?
Are there any other questions for Kristy and Andrea? Well, thanks for the great questions and the comments. And thank you, Kristy and Andrea, for that very informative presentation. And again, thanks all the participants for being here today, and we hope to see everybody on December 9th.